Sometimes we make things more difficult than they have to be. Have you ever noticed that in your life? That sometimes you make things more difficult than they have to be?
Yes.
Have you ever just waited and waited and waited to apologize or do something, and then you're like, oh my God, who knew it could be that easy? That sometimes we just make things difficult. And sometimes it's because we're just learning, and perhaps, we're just discovering some new capability. I remember when I was a kid, both my parents worked, and so whichever parent got home first would start cooking first. And it was usually about 50-50. And this particular day, my dad got home first, and so I was there in the kitchen, and he said, get some potatoes and start peeling them. Help and peel some potatoes. Now, I had never yet done that because my mom didn't think I was ready for a knife, but apparently Dad didn't know that. So I had seen my mom, and my mom could take a potato and peel it and make it look like a work of art. She could do a tomato the same way, just one seamless skin. I thought, well, it can't be that hard, and you probably need a big knife to do that. And so I found a pretty big size knife, and I started, and mine was not a piece of art. It looked more like a badger attacked that potato and tried to get the skin off. I was trying and struggling, and about that time my mom comes in, and she comes over and sees what I'm doing, but she just said, honey, let me show you how to do this. She said, there's a kind of knife called a Perry knife. And she got a little knife, and she got another potato and held it in my hand, and I will never forget that feeling of like, wow. Oh my God, who knew? Who knew that it could be so different? Can you recall in your life discovering something and seeing something come together, maybe having someone show you something? Who knew that it could be this way, it could be this easy? There's also those times that we discover something that has been there all along, and yet we never even knew it existed. I had one of those experiences the first time I went to Unity Village outside of Kansas City. I heard you could take classes, and I was wanting to go, so I took 2 weeks off work, and I took my 2 weeks vacation, and I went to take 2 weeks of classes back to back. The first week, this was the last week in October, it was, sunny, it wasn't terribly cold, but over the weekend it snowed, hence the Midwest. It really changed. And so here I am this second week. I wasn't really prepared, and this is a big campus with buildings spread everywhere, so I'm putting on all the clothes I can find and weathering this cold weather. So one day I had been at lunch with a few people talking, and we all had the same class again after lunch, and so we get ready to leave, and they just throw their jackets over their arm and head this way, and I'm bundling up with all my clothes, heading out the door, and they said, where are you going? And I said, well, I'm going to the next class. And they looked at each other, and they said, oh, she hasn't yet discovered the tunnels. I was also still a little nervous about Unity because I had heard that cult thing, and I thought, okay, is this the moment? What's gonna happen here? I think I could take down a couple of these people, and I don't know. Have I heard about tunnels? And they said, yeah, this place was built, so there's several layers under the ground. There's all kinds of stuff. Come on, we'll show you. You don't have to go out in the cold. And so I followed them, and who knew? I said, oh my God, I don't have to get wet. I can just, in cold, you could walk under these incredible tunnels, which, by the way, actually for a number of years were a hiding place for the President of the United States. Now that I've told you, it's not that anymore. But it was this really, really neat thing that I discovered. And so, perhaps you can recall one of those, oh my gosh, who knew? Do you remember the first time you had that sense of, oh my God, this is what it feels like to fall in love? Mm-hmm. You don't know until you know. Mm-hmm. And nobody can tell you, but when you experience it, you know. And I also will never forget the opportunity of seeing my brother be in the room when his son was born. And my brother, when they put my nephew in my brother's hands, his knees started to shake. And uncontrollably tears started to roll down his cheeks. And he said, oh my God, I I never knew my heart could feel this big. Oh my God, I never knew. If the Christmas story is about anything, it's about just that. Oh my God, I never knew. You see, there's so much more to us than meets the eye. We really are an expression of all that is. And we are spiritual beings. In unity, we call, in the scripture, it says that we're all heirs and joint heirs. Jesus said we're heirs and joint heirs. And what he was saying is that we have all inherited this divine blueprint, this divine potential. Every one of us has inherited this divine blueprint and divine potential. And in unity, we call it the Christ. In Hinduism, they call it the Atman. In the Bhagavad Gita, it's called I think it's called the immortal portion. And so whatever you call it, there's this perfect blueprint, this pattern of human being spirit, spirit being human, one and the same. And Christmas is really to remind us that that is who we are, and that there is so much more seeking to be expressed through us. There are things that we yet know not of, latent talents and abilities, and what we're really talking about are states of being, states of consciousness. And so that's where the love and the hope and the peace and the joy come in, that we may cultivate them within over and over in deeper and deeper ways where we come to say, oh my gosh, I never knew I could feel this much love. I never knew I could feel this much peace. I never knew I could feel this much gratitude. Can you recall? How many of you have had those moments? And when you have those moments, it opens you to the realization, maybe there's more. Maybe there's even more that I can experience. And so the Christmas story is to remind us that we're always birthing more and more of our potential. It's not a one-time job, but as long as we're here, as long as we have skin on, as I say, we're always birthing and bringing more of this into expression. Meister Eckhart, if you give me this quote, Meister Eckhart was talking about this very thing when he said, become aware of what is in you. Announce it, pronounce it, produce it, and give it birth. So that you can say, oh my gosh, I never knew. And then the next quote comes from Reverend Ed Townley, who is a unity minister. He wrote, Jesus embodied and demonstrated the divine being born and brought forth in human form as an indwelling divine presence, a light that shines through the darkness of human conditions and human conditioning and illuminates the spiritual truth of who we are. And that was the gift Jesus brought, was to tell us that we are all Christed beings. He said, the things that I do, ye shall do also, and even greater. He wanted us to know the truth of our nature as well. And then the next one, Paramahansa Yogananda, a lot of people may not realize that Yogananda was a real student also of the mystical side of Christianity. And he came to understand the man Jesus and what he actualized. Yogananda wrote, when man has lifted his consciousness from the ordinary sensory state to receive the only begotten Christ consciousness, to receive that pattern that you have inherited as the perfect expression, when this happens, then we shall see God, not with mortal sight, but with divine perception, meaning that we're seeing the God spark, the God potential within all creation. And so that's what Christmas is really all about. And it's about continually having those experiences of, oh my God, I never knew. I never knew. So how do we do that? The first way we do this, I believe, is it requires believing in this presence, this greater presence and potentiality in you. That's why hope, faith, is the first of the four attributes. It requires a level of belief. You see, just like those tunnels, if someone had said, there's tunnels, you don't have to walk out in the snow, you don't have to be cold. If I said, nah, I don't believe they're there. Well, my believing they're not there is only affecting one person, me. Our inability to fully comprehend and believe the truth of our nature, that and that alone is the only thing that truly stands between us experiencing it and expressing it. It is nothing else. It is no one else. And so the opportunity is for us to cultivate an attitude, a willingness to experience this eternal portion, if you will. There's a story about a woman. Her name is Nita Weil. Nita was born in California, and when she was a young adult, she moved to New Orleans, where she got married at a young age, had 2 children, and soon after, at 22 years old, she was diagnosed with polio. Her body began to deteriorate very quickly. It resulted into her going into the hospital, and she would stay there for 7 years. She was wheelchair bound. During those 7 years, Nita's marriage ended, and Nita also lost her children, basically, because she wasn't able to care for herself, much less her children. And so at the end of 7 years, when she finally had learned enough skill to get out, she was a devastated, broken, angry person, understandably so, wondering why had this been her lot in life? Why did she even live? She was in such pain. And sort of as a surprise to her, she received a call from a doctor. His name is Dr. Spencer from Houston. Dr. Spencer was one of the leaders at the time with TIRR, T-I-R-R. It's the Texas Institute for Rehabilitation and Research. He had heard of this woman, and so he invited her to come to this institute that they were developing and for her to be its receptionist. And even though she had polio and was in a wheelchair, he would like for her to come to work. And so she said she took everything within her to say yes, but something in her said yes. And so she was able to move to Houston, and they helped her get the transportation back and forth. And she was able to begin to go to work, and by going to work, she started to realize, well, I still have some purpose. There's still things that I can do. And after she had been there for a short while, she discovered the church in Unity Church in Houston, where the Reverend Howard Caesar is there now as a senior minister. Or Reverend Michael Gott, someone just corrected me, is there now. So she discovered this church, and she says that little by little, it began to sink in. That even though she was in a wheelchair, even though she had had incredible loss, even though there were many things that she could no longer do, she came to discover that there was an inner perfection. And she came to realize that perfection and these qualities of hope and peace and all of these qualities that we talk about, they are not dependent on how the body looks. They are not dependent on the circumstances or the situation. They can show up and be present in any form. Do you get that? They can show up and be present in any form. And so she began to change her thinking that perfection had nothing to do with her body. Perfection had everything to do with her spiritual identity. That this perfect pattern, this blueprint of divinity was just as much hers as anyone. And as she began to study and take classes and learn to pray and learn to meditate, she just began to glow. People around her said she literally had an aura that you could often see. She was just such a bright light. Well, Nita would go on to work at that agency for 43 years. She would work her way up, and from the receptionist, she became the director of volunteers for the whole institute. She had over 200 volunteers working for her when she left. She also, during her time there, started a corner store at the Institute. She developed an auxiliary that was the fundraising arm for the whole Institute. She also developed, not only for the Institute, but for all of Houston, a metro lift because she herself was in a wheelchair. She knew what that felt like. And so she developed a metro lift system that would help get people around, which it caused her to get the attention of the governor, where she received the governor's award. She retired in 2002. And Reverend Howard Caesar interviewed her, and she said she owed it all to claiming her spiritual birthright. That everything she was and everything she was able to do, she's a known name in that area. She's a bright light. And so for us, it's the opportunity of of believing in this presence and not getting so caught up with how it shows up. One of my friends gave a card to her husband that I absolutely love. The card says, "You are the answer to my prayers." But when you open it up, it says, "But you are not what I prayed for." You know? Been there? How those gifts, they show up, and we have to believe in this presence and this possibility, because there's always a gift to be found. You know, everything that happens is not good, but if we are open, if we will be the way. You know, I don't know about you, but quite often I get in the way. Anybody else? Instead of being the way, I be's in my way. And when we be in our way, we're blocking it. But if we can open, if we can believe and open, that whatever the situation looks like, there's love and peace and joy and hope that will come to and through and come to us. So that first is to believe in its presence. The second thing that we do is to nurture this presence. I don't know of anything that nurtures the entire being, the mind, the body, the spirit, like prayer and meditation. And I also don't know about you, but this time of year, I love this time of year. But it becomes in some ways sort of like a tug of war because I'm so busy. And there's the extra demands of shopping and doing this. Can anybody relate? You get, because this is the first group had almost done their Christmas shopping. They're like, "Oh no, I feel pretty good right now." You're the group that's still trying to get it done. That there's this balance going on and all these things. And I found myself this past week getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning. I get up early, but that's a little earlier than usual. And I had several other people say, "Yeah, I'd be waking up too." And it's because when we don't have enough time to nurture the spirit, the soul is trying to help you. The soul is trying to say, "Get up, make time to commune with the great I am. Make time for that, nurture that." So learning to nurture this presence within us. There's a story about a samurai who all his life had been a warrior, and he wanted to learn the way of peace. Because in his life there was angst and all of these things that he was having difficulty with, and so he sought out this little older monk, this little man who was about a third of his size, and he went up to this little monk and he said, "Can you teach me the ways of peace?" And the little monk looked at this big samurai and said, "I can't teach you the ways of peace. The only way to understand peace is to understand the ways of heaven and of hell." And he said, "Well, will you teach me the ways of heaven and hell?" And he looked at him kind of up and down. And he said, "You want me to teach you? How can I teach you anything? You are nothing but a dirty, ignorant." And the samurai just got incensed, and he grabbed his sword and swung back. And the little monk said, "And that, my friend, is hell." And the samurai just barely caught himself in time, and he said, "I almost took your life." And the little monk just looked at him. And the samurai said, "You have great courage and great compassion. You were willing to risk your life so that I could understand this. Oh my God, I've never experienced this kind of compassion." And he laid down his sword, and he was deeply moved, and the monk said, "And this, my friend, is heaven." You see, he was teaching him that heaven and hell, we go there different times throughout the day. States of consciousness, we can place ourselves in these places. And as we learn through our choices, is this nurturing me? Is this healing? Is this helpful? Or is this just creating more hell for me and the people in my household, and the people in my life, and the people in my work, and the people in my country? To begin to just pay attention to, when am I nurturing myself? And when am I crying? Is my body, my mind, my spirit saying, "You need to come apart for a while"? You know, the scriptures, it often says, "And Jesus would come apart for a while." It dawned on me a few years ago, if I don't come apart, I have come apart, like meltdowns, that it takes that coming apart in prayer and in meditation. So we cultivate this by believing in its presence, and then by nurturing it, by making time. Richard, would you give me the song? So we believe, we nurture, and then the third is to receive. You know, if you look at the Christmas story, however you interpret the story, there's the idea of having to say yes and receive, and that, oh my God, I never knew this was possible. And truly experiencing things that we never knew were possible. And it requires us to learn to receive and to open to the gifts that are available for us. And that's a spiritual maturity. It's a process. There's a story of two little boys who were spending the night with their grandparents at the Christmas season, and the parents were taking the night to go shopping. And it was the grandparents' tradition to have the little boys say their prayers before they went to bed. And so the little one was saying his prayers first, and he was yelling, "Dear God, I want a red bicycle for Christmas. And dear God, I want a red helmet." And his brother said, "Why are you yelling? God is not deaf." And the little boy said, "But Grandma is." You see, that little boy knew the source of his good. It was Grandma. And sometimes in life when we find ourselves yelling or struggling, it's because we don't yet know the source. When I was in my first ministry in Lawrence, Kansas, I was meditating one time and I saw MORE, M-O-R-E. And I saw it as an acronym for the Magnificent One, revealing and expressing. And I really got that humankind's hunger for more. It's not that more is better in the world of things. It's that we are here for more. The magnificent one, the miraculous one, is always revealing and expressing through us. And there's this innate pattern of possibility within us that is always saying, let me bring forth my potential. Let me blossom what is possible. And so for me, at this particular time in my ministry in Lawrence, when this was happening, I was really being open to open to guidance and to allowing God in my life in ways where I would say, oh my God, I never knew that this was possible. And right about this time, I was asked to officiate a funeral service for a woman who sometime attended the church. It was for her mother. She had elderly parents. And I barely knew the woman. I certainly didn't know her parents, knew very little about them, but that's not uncommon when you're a minister. You do a lot of memorial services. And so I was happy to support this family. And it was at our church in Lawrence, but something very odd happened. When I facilitated the service, different people were involved, and I actually didn't say or do a lot. But in the part I was doing, I don't remember exactly how it came out, but I said, and I can just see her like jumping up on a desk. And when I heard the words come out of my mouth, I thought, what in the world are you saying? That is not in your script. And I got choked up. And here I am literally tears streaming down my face. I felt this incredible presence of love. And I could just feel this. But I was battling feeling self-conscious and not, all these things are going on inside of me as I'm trying to keep it together. So I got through. After the service, I pay my condolences to the family. And as I'm walking away, her husband says, by the way, who told you the story about her jumping on a desk? No, tell me more. He said, my wife told the story all the time. He said, I'd forgotten about it. But she used to tell that story because his wife had served in some sort of military women's capacity back in the 1940s. And his wife was in Germany on the day Hitler was brought down. And on that day, his wife and another woman jumped up on a desk and danced. His wife spoke through. And so when he said, he told me that story, I said, oh my God, I didn't know this was possible. And I thought back about that feeling of love that had come through, why I had gotten teary at that very moment. And things began to open up in my life, and I have learned that life and light and love are eternal. And that's what we are at our essence. And so it's always seeking to come through. But it's asking us, can you open to receive? Can you open to receive and to be that channel? To let the guidance come, to let the love come. How many of you know that you're being called to open to the gift, to nurture the gift, to bring it forth in new ways? Because that gift is truly love. Give me that song if you will. There is only love. There is only love. Love that heals, love that sets us free. There is only love. Sing it out. There is only love. There is only love. Love that heals, love that sets us free. There is only love. So I invite you to close your eyes, to take in that breath. That which we call love at its purest essence. Love which recognizes itself in all others. Love which is there, independent of what else may not be there. Love never fails. Love is patient and kind. Love never fails. And this love is an energy of light. This love is a part of life. And it is this spirit that is our essence. It is who we are. And when we can become still and quiet, when there is no more efforting, there it is. Oh my God. I never knew that such love would rise up. I never knew that there was a quality of peace that, yea, though I walk through the shadow of the valley of death or whatever, does it mean that there is not fear? It doesn't mean that there's not doubt. But it means that there's a peace that goes with me and before me. It means that there's a hope that springs eternal, that knows that there's a purpose to my life beyond anything I can imagine. I invite you to consider how the presence of love is seeking more space in your life. How the presence of peace is wanting you to experience it in a hands-free kind of way. this moment, in this place, I remember who I am, letting fear